Hello, and welcome along to the fifth network gathering from here in sunny Sussex. So welcome to Annan School, which is where we are at the moment, and welcome to you. And I hope it's as sunny wherever you are as much as it is here. And I know we've got Froebelians from all over the UK who are with us tonight, as well as our friends from networks abroad. So welcome along. It's been 2 years since our last actual gathering in Richmond, and a year since our fourth gathering last April, when Tina read extracts from her book. That was our first online gathering in the year that Froebel, like probably the rest of the world, moved on to Zoom. And here we are, a year later, with our second online gathering. So you're very, very welcome, and I hope that you're going to enjoy this evening. I'd like to welcome many familiar names. I would usually say familiar faces, but familiar names. I'd like to particularly thank Jane Winnett for inviting those with strong connections to the Edinburgh network, or probably you should more correctly call it now our Scottish networks. And I hopefully was able to reach people from all the other various networks to the more general membership of the Froebel network. Froebelians, as you know, have a long tradition of networking, and previously in the sort of the Froebel movement, these were known as associations. Our current networks consist of regional networks, and regional networks are particularly strong in Scotland. And in addition to that, there are smaller networks of Froebelians who study together, and networks such as the Travelling Tutors Network and school or setting networks. And also our final presentation tonight, we were looking at a new network that we're hoping to launch. So that's something right at the end of our evening tonight. Now, in that connection, I'd like to give you a little bit of exciting news that over the next few months, and certainly by the end of this year, we're hoping the Froebel network will be working alongside the Froebel Trust on the Froebel Trust strategy, which is looking at strengthening the networking, particularly practitioners, so that Froebelians in the UK really do feel strong, connected, part of a large, important, influential, and ever increasingly, I believe, relevant movement. Now, the gatherings are held on Froebel's birthday today, April 21st, so happy birthday. It's time when we reflect and celebrate the Froebelian influence that unites us, and an opportunity to see how that influence continues today. This links really well with the first presentation, which Debbie Hunter and myself are absolutely passionate about. So the first presentation, I'm going to sort of start off really, and I'm going to start my presentation by looking to the past, to our strong and principle-based roots, to the Froebelian tradition as it grew through the UK, and linking Froebel's first school, the early Froebel movement, and how that uniquely developed in the UK during the 20th century with my own school here in East Sussex, Annan School. It's a Froebelian school, it's a primary school, it's a school for 2 to 11-year-olds. I must mention that I will be drawing on Jane Reed's research, and this is referenced in the written version of the presentation, which I'll put on the network website. So thank you, Jane. So if you hear little quotes from your piece in the narratives on Froebelian education, then thank you very much for that, and that will be referenced. So whilst we always think of Froebel's theory and his first kindergarten as dating back to the 1840s, we mustn't overlook that on this very day in 1842, Froebel was actually celebrating his 60th birthday. His ideas and principles had been developed over the preceding 30 years. Froebel's first school was actually for children for 6 or 7-year-olds up to 12, so 6 or 7 up to 12, which we would now call the primary years and even early secondary phase of education. The school opened in 1815, and from 1816-17 was established in Kyle and is still there to this day. Indeed, Froebel's Education of Man from 1826 set out an extensive pedagogy for older children on the basis of his practice at his school in Kyle. So indeed, as the Froebel movement developed and grew in the UK over the following 100 years or so, uniquely, Froebelians in the UK increasingly moved their focus to the education of children in the infant and junior classes. By 1917, the Froebel Society renamed itself the Froebel Society and Junior Schools Association, later becoming the National Froebel Union and Junior Schools Association. By the 1930s, its journal described itself as a journal for teachers of 5 to 12-year-olds. This new focus was also reflected in the training syllabus for Froebelian teachers, which moved from kindergarten training to students choosing to specialise in teaching children under or over 8 years old. By 1952, Miss Jebb, then principal of the Froebel College in Roehampton, claimed that Froebel-trained teachers have made the most important contribution to better teaching in junior schools. In 1954, she also reports that at present, it is only in the Froebel colleges that an integrated 3-year course of training in preparation for teaching children of primary age can be obtained. Indeed, the period of the 20th century from the 1920s to the 1970s, I would argue, should be considered as the golden age of Froebelian primary education. This was reflected in and specifically referred to in government reports from the beginning of the period, such as in 1931, the Balfour Primary Schools Report, which suggests that a good school, in short, is not a place of compulsory instruction, but a community of old and young, engaged in learning by cooperative experiment. It goes on to argue that the curriculum is best to be thought of in terms of activity and experience rather than of knowledge to be acquired and facts to be stored. That's 90 years ago in 1931, and they're talking about primary education. At a 1947 inspection of the Kender Street Junior Mixed and Infant School, a Froebelian infant school in Deptford, the inspectors noted that standards in the 3 R's have certainly not suffered by the substitution of free activity for the formal traditional methods. This uniquely Froebelian influence continued for a further generation, endorsed by the Plowden Report, published in 1967, entitled Children and Their Primary Schools. In its contribution, reflected throughout the report, the National Froebel Foundation suggested the aim of primary education should be to give children the experience of delight in learning and of success in working with others so that they can go forward with confidence to the next stage of education. This aim involves the cultivation of each child's potentiality, both for feeling and thinking, the provision of an environment in which full development can be achieved, and the acquisition of relevant skills which enable a child to tackle new situations and feel at home in his own world. Equally important will be the cultivation of curiosity, imagination, and inventiveness. It concludes, it follows that in a good primary school, the children are actively involved in learning, rather than passively accepting the instructions of a teacher, however able. Now, when I trained at Froebel, and I know there are a number of others who trained in the 70s and 80s who are still leading Froebelian influencers today, that Froebelian Plowden ethos was embedded in the teacher training courses that were then being offered. Froebel College continued in its focus on a Froebelian approach within infant and junior schools. The B.Ed teacher training course at Froebel was in first years of schooling, focusing on 3 to 7-year-olds with a compulsory teaching practice with receptional infant age classes. And in my case, the postgraduate certificate was in primary years of schooling. Yes, Froebelian discovery learning for children aged from 5 to 11. Certainly, my experience once qualified, the post-Plowden progressive climate at the time meant that teachers who had been to Froebel in particular were snapped up by primary schools because the head teachers knew that they would really understand how primary age children learn. Whilst there's not time to discuss the change in approach within primary education over the following 30 years, needless to say, I passionately believe that we shouldn't abandon those principles and their importance to the children in the primary years, infant and junior, seen as so uniquely important for Froebelians in the UK in the 20th century. Who is there to speak up for these forgotten children now in the political debate? So, what we've created over the last 20 years here at Annan, I don't believe is anything weird and wonderful or experimental. It's just sound, basic Froebelian primary education with teachers who understand how to put Froebelian principles into practice at the appropriate time depending on the child's age, and combining children's interests and how they learn with what the teacher or the national curriculum decides they should learn. There does, however, continue to be a misconception that a Froebelian approach in the primary years means that the education might be all very lovely, but we still get prospective, and I say prospective parents who say, oh, it's lovely, but I'm worried about what happens when they go to secondary school. This I would contrast to our actual parents who know the depth of understanding the approach aspires to, the rigor of the academic learning, but at the same time know that their children are in an environment where they love learning. This would be echoed by the children themselves, who would explain that they are allowed to make discoveries, supported, encouraged, challenged, freedom and guidance at its best, able to make mistakes, but also given opportunities to become the expert, be aware of their capabilities, strengths, and willingness to have a go. But how does that work within a society driven by accountability, and in education where accountability is gained through inspection? Well, after 6 years of anticipation with an interim compliance inspection under our belt, we had our first of the new full EQIs, Education Quality Inspections, in February 2020, just 2 weeks before lockdown. This was a combined inspection for early years, the primary years, and statutory compliance. For those of you not familiar with the English inspection regime, the DfE, the Department for Education, is responsible for ensuring that statutory standards are met in schools and early year settings through inspection. In maintained schools and PBI early year settings, these standards are inspected by Ofsted. In the majority of independent schools and early year settings which are part of those schools, the standards are inspected by the Independent School Inspectorate. Now, our school is overtly Froebelian, and we made this explicit throughout the inspection process. So, the question, can you be a Froebelian primary school in the 21st century and still keep the inspectors happy? Debbie Hunter is going to be looking at their findings. So I'm going to hand over to Debbie. Thank you, Debbie.
Just want to talk you through a little bit about the inspection and the Froebelian flavour of it. So the inspection took place over 3 days and involved interviews with school leaders, teachers and children, questionnaires of parents, children and staff, and lesson observations and scrutiny of work. The inspectors were shown everything, and our ethos was explicit and carefully explained. So what did they pick up? So I think it's important to, first of all, look at what the school aims to do. This is where you get a chance to say what you're all about. The school aims to educate children to believe in themselves and reach their own unique potential. It seeks to value and celebrate each child's achievements with genuine appreciation, understanding that everyone learns in different ways. And the school strives to create an environment where everyone develops into confident, thoughtful learners who are happy, love learning and make outstanding progress. So really the inspectors are reading that and thinking, is that what this school actually does? So one of the key principles that we were pleased they picked up on was knowing each child and valuing individuals. I think this is all about starting where the learner is, giving children time to learn at their own pace rather than being rushed through and everyone reaching goals at the same time. So the comments reflected this. Children from EYFS onwards make good progress from their individual starting points due to the high level of adult support and well-planned activities which reflect their individual needs and interests. Pupils are skilled communicators, articulate and confident. They listen well to one another and eagerly volunteer their views during class discussions, showing clear expression and an ability to articulate different viewpoints. And pupils have an appreciation of other cultures expressed in empathetic attitudes in interview and in warm relationships within the school. Pupils learn about a range of cultures and face through the topic-based approach, and throughout the school community, they're tolerant and respectful of all forms of diversity. Now, real life experiences is such an important Froebelian principle. It's something that we really wanted to make sure that the inspectors understood. If you want to learn about money, you go to the shop. You use real money, you use real china in role play, real tools in woodwork, real glasses in snack time. And if you write a letter, you post it. This is also about unity. It's about planting a seed, watching it grow, harvesting it, cooking, drawing, eating it, and then planting the seeds again. Everything is connected, and exploring materials and ideas in a concrete way before moving on to more abstract concepts. So the inspector's comments were pupils demonstrate initiative and independence, encouraged by the school's commitment to the Froebel philosophy, which emphasises the importance of creating a happy environment in which children can grow and learn life skills from real life experiences. In work scrutiny and lesson observations, it was evident that most pupils achieve good and some achieve excellent standards within numeracy, in line with the school's philosophy, which aims to keep mathematics as practical as possible, supporting the introduction of new concepts by enabling pupils to learn through real life experiences. And I think that leads us on then to purposeful outcomes and linked up learning. All learning is linked and connected, and unity is key here. Learning isn't accidental, and play and active learning is supported and valued, as is freedom of expression. So some of the comments were pupils are confident learners and develop good study skills because they're interested in the topics being covered and are well supported by their teachers. They plan and organise their work effectively and are active participants in lessons. The Froebel ethos, embedded across the school, which emphasises problem solving and decision making, contributes considerably to the development of this area of learning. Pupils are enthusiastic, engaged learners because the creative curriculum allows them to develop their interests and knowledge. Now, the picture at the top, probably wondering what that is actually the inside of a spaceship, which the children created with their teacher. These are 7 to 9-year-olds after a visit to the Science Museum. And they came back and the teacher said, what do you want to do with what you've learned? And they said, we want to make a space module. And they did, from wood and materials. And I'm sure Pete Morehouse would be very proud of them. Moving on to nurturing, obviously children in a Froebelian setting are valued, nurtured and treated as individuals. They're seen as competent learners and are listened to. Children know they can be themselves and everyone feels included. Nurturing and well-being, I think, is about caring, being at one with nature, enjoying your learning and not being rushed or pressured, but having structure and routine. So some comments here were pupils from EYFS onwards demonstrate high levels of self-confidence and to self-awareness in line with the school aims and actively promoted through the Froebel philosophy. The family atmosphere, mutual respect and warm relationships evident everywhere encourage pupils to be open in making their thoughts and feelings and to risk making mistakes. School leaders have made self-belief fundamental to the school's approach to learning, and the mutual trust between pupils and teachers has a positive impact on pupils' progress. And then we come to freedom with guidance. Obviously, children are shown how to use real tools and make decisions about their learning, and then they're trusted to take responsibility for their learning from an early age. This does require high levels of self-regulation and did need a lot of explaining. Discussion with pupils and lesson observations showed that the school provides the atmosphere for children to become confident decision makers. For instance, to decide when to ask for help or to set targets for themselves. Pupils commented that they gain confidence in their own judgments because teachers encourage them to try to solve their own problems and have a go. And pupils understand that they're responsible for making the right decisions in relation to their work and behaviour, and said that the school provides many opportunities for them to make decisions, supporting them to discover through their experiences what a good or a bad decision is. The role of the adult is key in a Froebelian setting, modelling, supporting, challenging, and this was reflected in some of the comments. But you can hear the pupils' voice there. Pupils respond to the teacher's encouragement, and this interactivity develops their creativity and individual confidence and progress. Pupils take pride in their work and responsibility for their own learning. Work in their individual learning journey shows considerable care and effort. Strong commitment and support from the leaders and teachers create an ethos and framework that supports all pupils, including those with SEND. In interviews, pupils were keen to tell inspectors that they appreciate the support and guidance they receive from their teachers and say they are always available to talk to and are kind and caring. Obviously, engaging with nature is a core value really in all Froebelian settings, learning in nature and learning through nature, getting outside and bringing the outside in. Spirituality and awe and wonder are present in the outdoors. The inspector said pupils' knowledge and understanding of the natural world around them are excellent, in line with the school's Froebel philosophy and aims. Pupils have excellent spiritual understanding developed through the woodland teaching, candle time, and the PSHE curriculum, and pupils freely work collaboratively and are keen to take the initiative in their own learning, often suggesting topics and activities which are followed up by the school. The outdoor learning programme contributes strongly to this and to all pupils adopting a growth mindset approach whereby they see the value of following their interests. Creativity, imagination, and depth of understanding. Creativity is about open-ended thinking and learning. It's about trying out ideas, problem solving, following children's interests and working collaboratively or individually. Pupils' reading and writing skills are of a good, sometimes excellent standard. Their writing demonstrates creativity and empathy, and great care is taken in the presentation of their work. They write fluently, using increasingly sophisticated language and content, because the creative curriculum enables them to appreciate imaginative concepts and ideas, and their work is celebrated and given status by their teachers in line with the school's aims. Junior pupils' individual learning journeys demonstrate pupils' excellent handwriting and illustrations and a depth of understanding and imagination. And finally, there was a lot of comments about community. Community for us is not just about the community outside, it's about us as a community of learners with parents and children and teachers together. So pupils have a high awareness of their responsibilities towards others. They make a significant contribution to the local community. Pupils spoke about the enjoyment of stories from other countries and cultures, often shared in the woodland area, enabling them to work together to develop their sense of community and an understanding and tolerance of others. And all pupils agreed that the school encourages them in this regard, often through candle time and in their woodland activities. Their tolerant and understanding approach is encouraged by the curriculum and is best seen in the positive relationships between pupils, including those with different emotional needs. There's a picture there of some of the elderly residents of local care home who we have links with, who we invited in for a tea party. And at the bottom, some story gardens that some children made, and the parents were invited in to come and share those. So to sum up, advice was once given to me, which was about inspections, which was about show and tell, not hide and seek. And I think that being knowledgeable about your principles, reflecting a depth of understanding, not only from well-trained staff, but also from the children's voice, and holding on to our core beliefs and articulating them strongly, resulted, as you can see, in the Froebelian principles shining through in the words of the inspectors throughout their report. Thank you. I'm now going to hand over to Lynn McNair, who will give an update celebrating Froebelian work in Scotland.
Thank you, Debbie. And
Lovely.
I just want to say congratulations on such an excellent report. You must be so proud.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to spend 15 minutes only just speaking about Froebel in Scotland, really, and just some of the things that have happened in the very recent times, to be honest. We're currently, Jane, Katrina Gill and I are running 11 courses, really 10 here, but there's going to be a summer school too running this year. So we're running these courses throughout Scotland, really, and they're CPD courses, so Froebel in Childhood Practice, and they are what I think I'm really impressed by is that our numbers never dropped last year. You know, we 479 students are currently being taught in Edinburgh as we speak on Froebel. And like everybody else that's working in colleges or universities, we had to create our courses so that they were ready kind of for online learning. And that was a really great thing because it gave us a chance to look at each day, break it down, redo it, look at new references, as you would do anyway with your work at university or colleges. But I think it was an extra challenge this year, just preparing everything for online. And I just want to say again that like nearly 500 students remained with us through this process. What I'd like to do today is just tonight really is just give you some kind of little glimpses into the Froebel CPD, how that's been received by our students and also our new master's programme. I think that the students in many ways say what they say really is much more valuable than what I can say. They provide really invaluable kind of perspectives. And so what I'm going to do over the next few slides is just share with you some of the some Froebelian quotes. And this is a little thing, this is, I'll just move our people over here like that. So this student is really just talking about that she's enjoying the course, or he's enjoying the course. And they talk a lot about, when I was listening to Mark earlier, I was thinking about him quoting from Jane Reed's book and I can see, and I was thinking, I can really see a kind of flavour right throughout all these students' quotations. I'm going to just move this along again. And here people were kind of, saying, I'm enjoying the input so far. But they were saying things like, oh, it's been one of the most influential and thought-provoking courses that I've attended. And, this is really great. But I mean, these were just comments that were shared with us. We never prompted these. So really people just feeling that they really wanted to value the course. And this person said, I think it's been great, it's been well organised and very interesting. And the presenters and pace of the quality of presentations has been excellent. And just a wee reminder that Jane, Katrina and I do deliver some of the course, but we also have the most wonderful Jane Reed and Helen Tovey also participating fully and delivering two big significant parts of the course. And, interestingly enough, when, I was listening again to Mark at the very introduction, I was thinking a lot about the word reflection, and it appears in many of these quotations, how these practitioners are really thinking about their practice with the children. And this is like a really nice one because it kind of talks about, how confidence is getting built. I was listening there to Debbie and she was saying about the importance of knowing your principles and being able to articulate them. And of course, we really argue for that in a Froebelian world. And the main thing, of course, is that you can articulate those principles and really it does help your confidence. And this person has said, it's been a real pleasure to attend. And again, I just want to say to you that, we're talking about people all throughout Scotland that have commented on this course, and it is basically an online course. So, they're telling us, in a way that they're still really, really enjoying it. And I know that all of us would like to have been face-to-face. When you're delivering a kind of Froebel course, it seems just really important to be face-to-face and develop those relationships. As Debbie pointed out, the importance of being part of a community is really significant. But what is really heart-lifting in a way is that the students really did get a lot out of the course. And here, another person that's actually just saying that, it's gone so well and despite these times. And most of you will know that we run an MSc education. I believe, I think I saw many of the students' names popping up on in the chat. And the wonderful thing is that we have had been supported with scholarship from the Froebel Trust, and I've got some examples of some of the quotations from some of the students here. And of course, you don't want to read this very heavy text. I've only chosen quotes where Jane and I are mentioned. No, I'm only joking. Just seeing if you're still listening. But a lot of our students, I would describe, are widening participation students. Many are, they are working in full time. They have families, and often, as this person said here, they might never have been able to do the Froebel Trust without the scholarship, and if you look, I've highlighted just a few sentences. I'm sure there's many that are worthy of highlighting, but this person's saying that this has really enhanced her professional learning, and it's had a positive impact on her life, both professionally and personally. So really lovely. And I've said here access and progression because I kind of feel what this quote is kind of saying to me is the importance of the scholarship, of course, and that she would never have been able to pursue this master's if it were not for the scholarship. But she's also talking about how she's really deepening her knowledge, how her knowledge is growing and further developing, and she's a leader in her field, so really supporting others. But going back again to what Mark was saying, we can see from the this person's noted that the regulatory reports of her local authority have the establishments have started being in the very good to excellent category, and she really relates that to the Froebelian trained practitioners. And again, she's also saying, I can't thank the Froebel Trust enough. I thought this was a really interesting quote because I hope you'll see that from these courses that we're running, there's a real thriving community, really. And because this person sort of starts off saying, yes, I got the scholarship from the Froebel Trust, but she's also saying, it's more than that for me. It's like it's really helped me develop my Froebelian knowledge, but also it's helped me be a critical and reflective thinker and more reflexive than ever, and it's made her much more passionate about her work. And I particularly liked the fact that she talked about her thoughts were disrupted, because that again is wonderful, because that constant questioning. Tina was talking recently about Froebel's work and saying that, and this is something that we all know, but one of his main aims were to cause thought. And I thought that this sounded really lovely. And again, this student is really thanking the Froebel Trust. I started thinking of some words like, what do we really want as Froebelians from practitioners in the field? Do we want them to be passionate, dedicated, committed, reflexive, lifelong learners? And if so, and that was just some adjectives really, but there's all these quotes are all saying about how their knowledge is deepening. And I know you'll probably say, well, they're on a course, Lynn, that they should be learning, but it's the way that they're writing in this really passionate way. And there is definitely little golden threads throughout all of these quotations. I also thought you might be interested to know that some of the dissertations that are emerging from the MSc as well. So slow pedagogy, and that really emerged from the Froebel Trust conference and Alison Clark's outstanding presentation on that. And child-centeredness, play in primary one, the gifts and occupations, mother songs, Froebelian principles in practice, unity, connectedness and community. Everyone on this call will really appreciate that very, very true and real projects to research projects to study. In Edinburgh, we also began with a book group. So we invited 30 Froebelian practitioners or trained Froebelians to come and join this book group. And Tina very kindly came and introduced her book to the group at the very outset of the book group. And then we every week after that, we invited somebody to, do a synopsis of a chapter and then share that. And we also invited people to come with questions in mind that we would openly discuss in the book group. And it was really fabulous. I mean, it's not quite ended, it's still running, and it's on a Wednesday evening. And Tina came back to respond to some questions that the people in the book group had. And I think that, I was thinking about what this book group's done. We've not reflected on the learning yet, but we hope to still do that. But it gave us an opportunity to work with each other, with other fellow Froebelians, and it helped us understand. Tina's book, as I'm sure many of you will know, is very accessible, but the material in it is rather complex. So it's really deep. It's like she's captured all this work in this wonderful piece of work, all her work over these years, and really collated it all together. And so there was a lot of opportunities for us to look at the complexity of these chapters and listen to each other and the different perspectives that each other had. And of course, it's been a very motivating experience. And just kind of finally, we were... I used to teach on the BA at Edinburgh University, and I delivered a couple of classes, and subsequently the students asked me to do their keynote this year, and my keynote was on anti-racist kind of practice, and Tina very kindly came and shared her book to begin with, to open the conference, and then when I was sharing this, there was Froebelian quotes throughout, certainly beginning with some of Helen May's work, and it was a really good conference. I really enjoyed it. And what happened after it was many people contacted me and said they now want to learn about Froebel in Edinburgh, or they want to come and join our master's programme. And some people were on other masters or had signed up for other master's programmes, and they've decided to come to our one, and really because of the impact that Froebel is having in Scotland. And I thought that was a really useful thing to do. This is my final slide, and I think that this reminds me a little about like what Jane and I do constantly, this little pottering away on this wheel with kind of different colours, because we're always kind of changing like chameleons. Our fundamental principles are always the same, but we're always venturing out into new places or with new cohorts of students, and we learned so much from them. The other thing I wanted to say, which I think is really, really significant, and again going back to Mark's beginning of this conference today, is that many of our little cohorts that in Falkirk and in other places have started their own networks now. So there's lots of lovely little networks. The Edinburgh network, of course, is strong, and there's other networks becoming formed as well, which I think Froebel would have absolutely loved. So thank you very much for listening to me. And it now is my pleasure to introduce Mark Neal and Sasha Powell, who are going to give you an update on all the celebratory work that the Froebel Trust have done.
Lynn, thank you very, very much indeed. It's fantastic to hear about all the progress in Scotland but especially to hear what a great role the Trust's bursaries have played in enabling students to get the maximum out of the master's course. I think that's really encouraging, and Sasha and I can report that back to the trustees at our meeting tomorrow. Anyway, look, it's delightful to join you. In the normal course of events, I would join you by catching the 337 bus along the Upper Richmond Road to Richmond. And I'm sorry we can't meet in person, but next year in Richmond. And this does at least enable us to maintain the links that we value so highly. So what about the Trust? How is the Trust doing in these difficult times? Well, I think the Trust is in great shape, and it's in great shape primarily because of the fantastic work of Sasha and the great team we have. I was going to say the great team at Clarence Lodge, but the great team here and there, because nobody has been in Clarence Lodge for some time. But they have done an absolutely remarkable job in keeping the show on the road. And I'd also just like to pay tribute to our trustees as well, who give up a huge amount of time to ensure that the Trust continues to affirm its objectives. But particularly perhaps just to pay tribute to the work of two trustees who are standing down this year after 6 years as trustees, Sue Robson and Penny Chapman. And I'm sure Sue will be known to very many of you. She is, of course, a very distinguished Froebelian and has done great things for our research agenda. And I'm very pleased to say that Sue will continue on our research committee. And Penny has been a tower of strength in providing the Trust over the years of her trusteeship with the benefit of her legal and governance expertise. So those trustees do an extraordinary voluntary job on behalf of the Trust and Froebelianism. Of course, it has been quite a difficult year. Some of our grant giving has been in abeyance because there haven't been people to make the grants to. But it doesn't mean that there hasn't been a great deal of innovation. And one of the things that has changed over the last year is the fantastic reach that the Trust has been able to achieve by operating remotely. So whereas our annual lecture and our conference would normally be reaching hundreds of people, now we are reaching thousands of people from right round the world. And it's quite inspiring to see the messages coming in from all over the world in the run-up to the launch of our lecture or our conference. And that is a real plus, I think, for the Trust. It's also a very important moment for the Trust reach to be extended in that way, because the Trust message, I think, is more important than ever. Children and young people have borne the brunt of the health emergency with restricted opportunities to explore, to be outside, to socialize. It's very, very important that children are now at the forefront of the recovery, and at the forefront of the recovery, not in the sense of being the recipients of lots of didacticism, but in the forefront of the recovery because they are able to explore, to play, to take decisions, as we heard in the inspection. And that's the message of the Trust. It's a message which our work funding research substantiates. It's a message that our training of practitioners enables to be put into practice. It's a message that we now need to reach out to the decision makers and to parents with through the networks that we're now forming. And I'm going to hand over to Sasha to talk about our strategy for doing exactly that. So Sasha, over to you.
Thanks, Mashing. Thank you very much. Okay, well, hello everyone, first of all. It's lovely to be with you this evening. I'm going to share with you, as Mark said, our new Froebel Trust strategy, which was approved in January this year. In theory, it's a 5-year plan, but we've learned, especially in the last year, to expect the unexpected and to evolve accordingly. This new strategy takes account of both global and local issues in early childhood education and care, and in particular the role that we can all play in advancing Froebelian education in partnership for a more equitable, sustainable, and hopefully mentally healthy world. Our new strategic priorities also take account of discussions over the last 18 months or so in our council and our committees and with the Trust's friends and partners. But we know we've got more to learn and more listening to do. We've tried to make sure that everything in our strategy is connected and gives us a more integrated approach to fulfilling our charitable objects. Just going to move us on if I can. Great. We know that training is vital. We aim to find creative ways to reach and support as many colleagues as possible and to ensure that our resources are shared equitably. Of course, with expansion in our reach, such as that which Mark mentioned, there has to also be attention to detail to make sure that what we offer is relevant and is experienced as high quality. And this applies to newcomers to a Froebelian approach and to those who are experienced. The Froebel networks have shown us that a sense of belonging is an important part of professional identity, solidarity, and for sustaining high quality practice. And so this means that we want to create and help to support and sustain Froebelian groups or communities of practice that will engender professional connectedness, nurture, and constructive challenge. We know also the persuasiveness of evidence. So we want to research and evaluate the benefits of our work and of Froebelian education, and we'll do this always in accordance with our principles and values. That means, for example, that children's experiences, their perspectives of being, or we might say the value of childhood in its own right, are at least as important as understanding outcomes. We view benefit as subjective. It is the positive aspects of impact from the perspective of those whose diverse, authentic experiences we want to understand. It's lived stories, a term I've borrowed from Lynn McNair and her colleagues at Cowgate. These lived stories will help us to demonstrate our worth to the Charity Commission and to the public at large. Of course, though, negative experiences are not to be ignored, and these also help us to evolve and improve our work. As Mark has said, the pandemic has changed how we've worked in the last year, and it's enabled us to reach very many more colleagues around the world. But as one of our trustees remarked recently, if I wanted to employ a trained Froebelian, where would I find them? And so we want to do more also to map the landscape of Froebelian expertise, commitment, and interest. Our strategic programmes have changed from research, practice development, and public and policy awareness to enabling through a variety of grants, informing through, for example, training, resources, events, connecting through strong networks and collaborations, evidencing the characteristics as well as the benefits of Froebelian approaches, and championing the strengths of children, families, and early years educators, and a principled approach to education and care. I think our work has grown into and in all these areas. So we don't only make grants, we don't only provide training courses. I believe that the newly framed strategic programmes are probably more indicative of who we are now and what we do. So translated into broad action plans. In practice, these strategic programmes will involve increasing our collaborative work to enhance our ability to meet our charitable objects. We'll be modifying our grant schemes to ensure we're being as inclusive and equitable as possible, and that our research, practice, and public engagement activities are all interconnected. We'll be learning more about who our so-called stakeholders are and what they need and want and think about us. And we'll be listening for impact stories in the context of changing environments and using those to improve how we work and who we benefit, so that we make sure we're using our resource as wisely as possible. We'll be reaching out differently so that we speak meaningfully to diverse groups, and we'll be providing a range of platforms to promote Froebelian voices. And I think our success indicators for these strategic programmes will always hold in mind our charitable objects and the Froebelian principles of unity and connectedness, of autonomous learners, of the value of childhood in its own right, about the importance of relationships and creativity and the power of symbols, and of course the central importance of play and of engaging with nature. And last but definitely not least, about knowledgeable and nurturing educators. So we're at the very beginning of a strategy that's designed to be sensitive, proactive, inclusive, creative, and responsive. We are acutely aware that our little team relies very heavily on the goodwill and commitment of so many volunteers and partners. We're very grateful for this. And we're also grateful for the chance to share some of the key ideas in our strategic plan with you this evening. But if you'd like to know more about it, about our plans, about what we're doing, please do get in touch. You've got an email address there and a whole host of different ways that you can look up and follow the kinds of things that we're up to. I'm going to finish now and hand over to Jane Whinnett, who'll give us a presentation on a Froebelian perspective on mathematics. Thank you.
Hey, it's lovely to be here. I can't believe it's a year since we were last all together on screen for the gathering. And we've become much more au fait with this media, I think, for learning and for disseminating information. So tonight I'm going to speak about mathematics, and particularly a Froebelian perspective on mathematics. I'll just get my arrow going in the right direction. No, this one. Okay, so Friedrich Froebel's quest to find a universal law to describe his understanding of humanity's relationship with nature, the universe, and God resulted in his theory of unity. He used a sphere to symbolize this. It may seem a bit far-fetched, but Brian Cox, Professor of Particle Physics at the University of Manchester, confirms there's a shape that appears in all scales in the universe, sculpted by one of the fundamental forces of nature, gravity. Laws are beautiful and universal. And Froebel expresses this as, every circle for me is full of symbolic significance. The ball or sphere is a symbol of perfection, of something complete and finished. It's the symbol of my fundamental spherical principles of education and life. We know from Froebel's autobiography that his passion for the natural world led him to study different subjects that deepened his understanding and confirmed his theory of the unity of all things. He studied physics, chemistry, and mineralogy. And in Berlin, he sought out Professor Weiss, a leader in the field of crystallography. It comes as no surprise that when Froebel designed his own equipment, gifts and occupations for the kindergarten, that he began with a sphere. The first gift was a set of rainbow-coloured soft balls, each with a string attached. When we begin to look at mathematics through a Froebelian lens, it's natural to start with nature and the gifts and occupations. The first gift was intended for babies. So how do we see a similar equipment in practice today? Treasure baskets that include spheres made of different materials are a natural way to offer this opportunity to babies who can sit. Having balls made of many different natural materials supports children to develop their understanding of the same and different. As they explore, they begin to build concepts of roundness, weight, colour and texture, and it introduces babies to the ideas of same and different, essentially Froebel's law of opposites. Babies assimilate and accommodate these new experiences into their growing understanding. Froebel commented, "It's remarkable how the whole of arithmetic and the whole teaching of number is connected with the perception forms of the kindergarten." The building gifts provide excellent opportunities for children to explore three-dimensional shapes. The gifts were presented in little boxes with guidance about how to open them so that the blocks were presented as a complete cube made of integral parts. The child could then manipulate these shapes to find out about their properties and represent their own ideas using them. For example, gift 5 is made of cubes and triangular prisms. Some are quarter cubes and some are half cubes. And the child could discover how these triangular prisms fit together to make other shapes, a cube or a larger triangular prism. When the child had finished playing, the blocks were to be built back into the cube shape and the box lowered onto the hole. Children then see the volume of the box, both as empty space and filled with a quantity of cubes, the beginning of an understanding of how to calculate volume. It's easy to see how aspects of shape can be introduced using the gifts, but how about time? Time is captured in the raw material in the rings exposed in a cut tree trunk. And each cube is in effect a time capsule when you look closely and see the grain on each one. Time to return to mathematics. How do we define it? A way to describe and make sense of the world, shape, measure and quantity, the study of patterns. Understanding the pattern makes the learning easier and makes that learning adaptable to new situations. A way to describe and make a sense of the world resonates well with Froebel's description of how the gifts could be used. We have seen the pages of some of the manuals created to illustrate the use of gift 3. Froebel described the forms of daily life, forms of beauty and forms of knowledge, all the while using small blocks. The child develops a facility for expressing their ideas through the three-dimensional shapes and internalizes the spatial relationships created. Forms of daily life are representations of everyday things the child sees, buildings, furniture, features of the landscapes. The shapes of the blocks are used as a medium to describe their concrete, first-hand, real experiences. When we think about quantity, each gift contains a set number of blocks. The quantity remains the same as the child is encouraged to use all of the blocks within that box. This is a way of learning about Piaget's conservation of number. The overall shapes change, but the number of blocks is the same. Children also learn about pattern and the symmetrical forms that they could build, forms of beauty. In these little boxes, the beginning of later mathematical processes can be explored in concrete form. Looking at the illustrations from the manual, it's easy to see how understanding of the processes of reflection, translation, and rotation in geometry can be experienced firsthand. There's the beginning of algebra and the illustration of the knowledge related to gift 3, showing equivalence by separating the whole cube into 2 halves. It's the beginning of symbolic thinking to begin to understand that a cube can stand for X in an equation. So within the little boxes, there is the potential to discover many abstract mathematical processes in concrete form, and to use these blocks to describe the world just as mathematics does. Looking at the relationships between the gifts, we can see the progression from 3-dimensional shapes to 2-dimensional shapes like tiles, to sticks, to lines like sticks, and points like dots. These are all physical forms used in later geometry. Brunner maintained that you could teach anything to any child in an intellectually honest way. When children had explored fully each gift, they could combine them all of the boxes that had gone before, and this opened up a whole new world of relationships and connections. So now let's look at some of the theories that resonate with Froebelian practice to help us to develop our pedagogy and think about environments and resources. How do young children learn mathematics? There's often a misconception that mathematics is only about number. In fact, number is near the pinnacle of the pyramid of understanding mathematics, according to Munn. The foundation is built on movement. Munn states that the broader the base of the pyramid, the sturdier the activity at the top will be. Returning to Froebel's writing, we see how he describes the infant's first few hours and days, and how he recommends that the baby should not be swaddled to allow free movement. We also know the importance he placed on movement through the games that he devised. With the changes in society and a more sedentary lifestyle and more limited access to that freedom of outdoors, as well as some of the equipment designed for young babies that restricts their movements, we can see how important it is for a child's mathematical experience for every child to have opportunities to move freely, and for educators to facilitate and encourage this. The pyramid is also useful as a reminder of the experiences necessary for children who have atypical development. This is a useful tool for knowing what to do when you don't know what to do. It will help us to think outside the common approaches to number activities, and recognises that understanding quantities is a more difficult concept than reciting numbers or recognising numerals. So how do we do it? What is our pedagogy? In Exploring Learning Young Children and Block Play, Tina Bruce describes 3 approaches that influence the character of early years curriculum: laissez-faire, didactic, and interactionist. I will argue for an interactionist approach. Froebel spoke of freedom with guidance. Laissez-faire might appear to be freedom, the child doing as they want when they want. In reality, very few children learn mathematics on their own. They need the guidance of an adult to interpret and articulate what they are learning, to support the child to reflect, and that's fundamental to a Froebelian approach. In this photograph, we can see that interaction approach in action. The educator is observing, supporting, and extending. She's sitting back to observe, but is not passive. She's engaged in the child's play, but not intrusive or interfering. She respects the child's freedom to carry out his agenda, but is ready to offer a suggestion or guidance, seen in the way that she's holding the block, ready to offer it if it's needed. As well as the interactions with the adults and other children, the environment and resources are important to support children's learning. When thinking about resources to develop mathematical thinking, we need to consider the potential in all areas. For instance, the dolls in the home corner can be of different sizes and ethnicities, as well as the potential to have twins. Their clothes will be of different sizes with a variety of fastenings and different colours. This supports children to make choices and solve real problems as they manipulate the clothes and the dolls to dress them. Thinking about how resources are organised so that children can see them and the relationships between the different resources helps children to develop an understanding of size and measurement. By having well-resourced baking area that children can learn to use autonomously, and also having different sized bowls, pots, spoons and scoops by the sand so that children could choose to represent what they know about baking in their play. In nursery displays or centres of interest, thinking about the selection of objects and making suggestions using mathematical equipment for measuring, for example, a selection of different sized pumpkins and a picnic basket on the floor with their measuring tape draped across the top. The materials are not autodidactic. Instead, they provoke thought and the potential for exploration and discussion. Mathematics is embedded in the holistic experience rather than separated from a familiar context. Children benefit from having real experience of maths with parents and people in the community. Seeing people measuring while at work helps children to make sense of the purpose of mathematics. Froebel describes how children need to both observe and do things for themselves to learn. We need to have high aspirations and high expectations of all children to learn. Children need opportunities to explore and take risks in their play, to develop mathematical concepts, building high, climbing high, counting high. For us to have these high expectations, we have to be well informed ourselves. This means understanding mathematics well ourselves. We need to carry out the concrete operations ourselves and articulate what we are learning. We can also learn from what research is telling us about effective approaches and how children learn. Using our Froebelian lens, we can interpret this in a way which makes sense and is congruent with our principles. Tina Bruce refers to this as being bilingual, using the language and interpret it in a way that makes sense to us and maintains the integrity of our beliefs. An example of this is the findings of the Educational Endowment Foundation in Improving Mathematics in the Early Years in Key Stage 1. The headline recommendations chime perfectly with a Froebelian approach, but it's about how we put these into practice. I've also used the work of Wright and et al. Useful to extend. I've also found the work of Wright and et al. Useful to extend my subject knowledge. Their approach describes the stages of early arithmetical development and start from observing where the child is. Having this type of subject knowledge helps educators to think about interactions, the environments for learning, and the materials available. They describe the emergent child in a similar way to Froebel when he describes the relationship between the kindergarten, the connecting school, and the primary school. Froebel sees the connecting school as supporting children to move from the literal and concrete to the abstract and use of symbols. In Wright's emergent stage, experiences are presented under 3 headings: number words and numerals, counting, and grouping. Under number words and numerals heading, the focus is on forward number words sequence 1 to 20, backwards number sequence 10 to 0, and numerals 1 to 10. In counting, there are 2 areas identified: counting involving visible items and collections in rows, and temporal sequences and temporal patterns. Finally, in grouping, there are also 2 areas identified: early spatial patterns and early finger patterns. So how do we translate these recommendations into practice in an appropriate way? Finding opportunities that make human sense, Margaret Donaldson's phrase, will support children's understanding best. These are real experiences that arise from daily routines, from seasonal growing, baking, woodwork, and in play. One of my colleagues, Stella Brown, successfully incorporated many of the recommendations into the daily toothbrushing routine by counting children present, creating dot patterns of toothpaste, encouraging children to represent the numbers with their fingers in different patterns, and counting down to the end of the toothbrushing time. It broadened the learning and the daily routine from a focus on health to a deeper educational experience. Baking and cooking include a wealth of mathematical experiences, from measuring in different ways with standard and non-standard units, to following a recipe adding different amounts, creating a menu, all in a real, relevant context. As well as the interactions with adults and other children, the environment and resources are important to support children's learning. When thinking about resources to develop mathematical learning, oh, for goodness sake, that's the same page I've already read. Sorry. As an approach that has a true Froebelian heritage, is singing. While number songs do not feature greatly in the mother songs, the songs are used as a pedagogical tool to work with parents in supporting their child's development. The song This Little Thumb is perhaps a precursor to using the fingers to count in the way described by Wright, and also to develop the understanding that fingers can be used symbolically to stand for quantities. It's fairly easy to find number songs that introduce the child to Wright's emergent stage, for example, counting forwards, counting backwards, next number forwards, next number backwards, and using the fingers. In this final session, I'd like to consider symbolic representation. Representation is such an integral part of understanding mathematics, whether it's ascribing a numeral to an amount or writing a formula, equation, or proof. This does not mean that we start teaching children to write numerals early to give them a good start in this. Froebel recognized the temptations educators may have to do this. Next comes the representation of the object by drawing, that is by the sign. Little bits of this belong in the kindergarten because the little fingers are yet too weak. Stick laying represents the drawing in one aspect, the making of circles, which the children like so well, to do with the slate pencil is another. The latter can be carried out to the simple flower and leaf forms. So much of a Froebelian approach is characterized by supporting children to express what they know through different media, through play, dance, music, blocks, sculpting, painting, and drawing. Froebel saw this as making the inner outer. Children need rich, real experience of the world to draw on as they create their own inner understandings. They need these experiences in the company of attuned adults who understand how their children are developing and learning and can talk to them about their ideas, an interactionist approach. When Froebel devised the sequence of his gifts and occupations, he returned to the construction of the three-dimensional shape in the form of the net of shapes in stick and pea. This gives children an opportunity to re-present their initial ideas about three-dimensional shape. There is unity created in returning to where they started, another example of Brunner's spiral curriculum. So much of the understanding of representing quantities is not about writing numerals, which can become a meaningless task devoid of the very understanding that it's designed to communicate. Worthington and Carruthers studied young children's mark making in detail, and they identify 5 forms of graphic marks: dynamic, pictographic, iconic, written, and symbolic. Worthington and Carruthers. These form a strong foundation to think about the way we model and encourage young children to represent their ideas. Finally, understanding mathematics from a Froebelian perspective makes sense of the world and encourages us to think about the knowledge we as adults need to have to support and extend the thinking of the children we have in our settings. Mathematics is part of the whole of children's learning, not a subject area that stands outside their lived experience. The end of the whole enterprise is the education of a person from the earliest years through his own doing, feeling, and thinking, and in conformity with his own nature and relationships, so that his life is an integrated whole. Thank you very much for asking me to present, and I'm now going to pass on to Pete Moorhouse, who's going to give us a talk on stick laying and stick and pea constructions in an artistic experience.
Wonderful, thanks Jane, that was really really inspiring. Let me just see if I can get my my screen up. hopefully we're seeing that now. Okay, but yes, so I'm going to be talking about stick laying and stick and pea. And I guess the first thing just to say is that I'm certainly not an expert in this area by any stretch of the imagination, but hopefully I can perhaps offer a slightly different perspective coming from an artistic background. And I guess I'm also very fortunate to have had the experience of visiting the Froebel museums in Bad Blankenburg, and Oberweisbach and Kielau, which are incredibly inspiring with the breadth of selection of gifts and occupations that are available to see there. So I want to start by giving the little a context of stick and pea within the whole set of gifts and occupations. Froebel actually referred to the gifts as play gifts, Spielgarten. But essentially, central to the gifts and occupations is this central principle of unity and connectedness, and the importance of learning through self-activity and reflection, through play essentially, and also that the forms of beauty, knowledge, and life are all made visible through the gifts, as well as the laws of opposites or contrasts. But I think the gifts and occupations were really designed to inform children about forms and harmonies and relationships that are found within nature. They're designed to enhance observation, that slow looking as children discover geometries, the geometric diversity of the world through the plainness of the use of these shapes. And they very much develop their two-dimensional and three-dimensional thinking, as well as importantly developing spatial thinking, again, which has got such an important foundation for mathematical thinking. They also allow children to engage in the aesthetic dimensions of life. And I think they very much provide a sort of a didactic for artistic design as well. And I think, arts and design are very much incorporated, even though Froebel didn't talk explicitly in terms of sort of art and craft. I think they are clearly both, really apparent within the gifts and occupations. And I think in terms of the gifts and the progression, I think it's incredibly thought through in terms of the cognitive and spatial development. There's a really beautiful, harmonious progression of sort of understanding that develops. And I think a lot of those key influences, a lot that Jane was talking about earlier, that really impacted on this development, his keen love and observation of nature, his experience of studying crystallography, and importantly, his philosophical approach, really believing in that sort of interconnectedness between all things, the relationships between living and inanimate things. And in The Education of Man, Froebel wrote extensively about his philosophical concepts of the sphere and other geometrical objects. He wrote much less around the gifts and occupations themselves. And in fact, in terms of coding and classifying the gifts, he only coded from 1 to 7. And the subsequent sort of coding and classification was actually developed by Froebelian sort of successors and colleagues over the years. And there's been a lot of different schemes and a lot of slightly different ways of developing this into a sort of classification system. Some would advocate that the gifts are really just differentiated as 1 to 6. In other systems, it sort of goes from 1 to 10. And sometimes we can look at things in different ways in terms of things that can be returned to the whole, as with the cube gifts, or thinking about some of the activities are permanent, or some can be undone. If we think of the contrast between stick interlacing and sewing, so there's a lot of different divisions. But I think the most important aspect is that they all link, and that the progression within the gifts and occupations is very important. Just going back, I mean, it's interesting looking at Maria Kraus-Bolte's classification back in 1879, where she divided them into the solids and planes and lines, points, and other forms. And then we can look at contrast that with Bostermann's classification in the Inventing Kindergarten book. But there is, I think in Bostermann's, it really highlights the quite beautiful sort of symmetry of starting with the solid gifts and then sort of moving on to the plane, the surface, then onto the line, then to the point, and then reverting back to the line, back to the surface, and then at the end returning to the solid. So a beautiful harmony within that sort of progression. But I think, to summarize, that there is no definitive classification, but, all of the different gifts and occupations are very closely interconnected. And I think, there really is a very sophisticated, complex, systematic progression that really emerges through a close sort of adherence with the gifts and occupations. And they also present a really breadth of opportunities to develop skills and techniques through the use, particularly with the occupations. And it's interesting, I see a lot of the materials used, that they actually become the teacher. The materials themselves become the guide that allows freedom. And I think that's actually got quite a few sort of connections with modern ideas of new materialism, with this sort of dialogical sort of interaction that is often talked about currently. Another interesting aspect that I sort of came across when I was sort of researching this was looking at design education at university level. And a lot of courses now use design morphology. And these are essentially play puzzles for training students to think more spatially about form and space. And they're defined as a closed set of parts that relate to each other in specific ways based on their attributes of form, which, when we think about it, is exactly what we've got with the gifts. And I think, essentially, Froebel's system of the gifts and occupations are, in many ways, a university level introduction to two-dimensional and three-dimensional form. And so in that sense, I think that the power of them is quite extraordinary. So now, taking a closer look at stick laying, the stick laying allows children to move from the surface to the line. And the sticks would have been either the straight sticks or the curved sticks, which relate to the outer surfaces of the solids. Initially, they were often used together with the tablets in terms of children marking out the outer edges. And of course, they're used to represent, things in many ways, from symbolic representation in two-dimensional form, allowing children to move from the concrete to the abstract with their constructions. And there was a really careful progression sort of encouraged with use of the sticks, starting with a small number of small sticks, then incorporating a greater variety of lengths, sometimes combining with the use of the grid. And interesting, Froebel really advocated the modification of models rather than moving, wiping things out of the way and starting again with a new design. That he really thought there was a lot of value in adapting and modifying, designs, which is quite interesting. So the sticks allow, multiple opportunities for creating symbolic representations, where children represent experiences that they've had in life. And then from sort of stick play, we can see natural sort of progressions to work with the slats and the interlacing of the slats, which then would lead on to paper weaving, to fabric, leading on to then to fabric weaving, and possibly onto basket weaving. So we see how these progressions are all very closely interlinked. And then we've got the point, when obviously the connection of the points allow us to create shape. So either introduced as just sort of small sort of counters to arrange. I love this almost square tennis racket. We saw this in Oberweisbach at the museum, which is basically with the wooden points to create pattern. And then of course there's the perforating. And I think this combination of the stick with the point leads very much on to the stick and pea work, which really reintroduces the concept of volume and allows a more sort of architectural or design process. And it builds, very closely on those earlier explorations of the blocks, of line and of point. And it allows children to initially to start working two-dimensionally and then to start drawing in space. And through the use of the structures, they also will be inherently learning a lot about sort of strengths and rigidity, which is fascinating in terms of developing those sort of early concepts of design principles. So a lot of the original sort of material that I looked at was actually had a lot of templates incorporated with it as well, that children were following sort of instructions in many ways in terms of some of the forms they were making. Which I was a little surprised about, because I'd sort of assumed there'd be a slightly more sort of open-ended exploration, which is what we would advocate more today. But in terms of the different materials that can be used, for in a practical sense for doing, stick and pea work in your setting, of course, there's the peas. Cork balls can be, they're fishing floats essentially. But these little cork balls are really beautiful for joining. They look very aesthetic as well. Or getting cork tiles and cutting them up into bits. There's also malleable materials such as wax, clay, plasticine, and also foam balls, which actually are incredibly easy to use. And also, because if we're using small cocktail sticks, they're actually quite sharp. So for younger children to really access the potentiality of stick and play work, they actually function really well. I mean, I'm actually quite uncomfortable about using food as a plaything. So I'm not so keen on using chickpeas or peas with children. We have a lot of, a number of families in our setting that are, accessing food banks. So it just feels that we need to be more careful with the use of food. But these foam balls actually function really well. Other options are using rolled up newspapers to create sort of larger, stick sort of structures. And interestingly, in Scandinavia, there's a tradition of creating gemeli, which are essentially straws that are threaded through to create sort of geometric sort of shapes, which is really beautiful decorative features. So a lot of the designs that we see emerging from stick and pea, of course, relate to these forms that we see in nature. In fact, at the weekend, I was lucky enough to be in Wales. You don't often see Wales with a sky like that, but it looked great. But this is a slow branch, and I was just observing the absolutely incredible geometric arrangement of the stems there, and it very much reminded me of the sort of stick and pea sort of arrangements. And of course, Froebel's work around crystallography very much informed a lot of these geometric shapes, as well as more modern structures from chemistry, often represented with stick and pea sort of molecular arrangements. So in terms of the geometries that we see within stick and pea work, we see the basic triangle, we see those shapes incorporated in different ways within nature, which leads us on to the square and the cube, which we see within sort of crystals, for example. We have the pentagon, again, which is visible in so many different ways within nature. And then, of course, we've got the hexagon, which is my favorite. It's such an extraordinary form, really, and again, incorporated in so many different ways within nature. And then we've got the, looking at the progression, so children will be starting obviously with the straight sticks first, then working with two-dimensional shapes, then moving on to simple three-dimensional forms. and then, moving into a more complex, skeletal solids, skeletal sort of structures. And children will work, in a variety of different ways, often working with symbolic representation, other times working with shape and pattern. And I think there's, we see a lot of sort of increasing complexity, the more that children use these. Now, I guess one of the things I really love about the stick and peas, the connections that they make, is almost a visual metaphor for Froebel's philosophy in terms of that universal connectedness and the links and making links between the different areas of learning as well. Interestingly, it's worthwhile just to point out that Islamic art actually has very similar origins, that all of the geometric patterns are also take their inspiration from nature, and all of the patterns are born from the same themes of circles, triangles, pentagons, hexagons, and squares. So it's quite interesting just to see that sort of connection and way they've been used in a very different sort of context. So what is the gifts and occupations, I think, have had a really significant impact on arts and design and architecture in a really large way. I think it's also, I mean, out of Froebel's gifts, especially moving on from 5 and 6, there was really a proliferation of block play. A lot of manufacturers started making block building sets, quite architectural sets. There were quite a few of these at the Froebel Museum as well. So at the time, in the latter part of the 1800s, we had a new generation of children that were essentially, playing in kindergarten, using the gifts. Perhaps they had a set of the more architectural sort of gifts at home. And this really, I think, has had quite a profound impact. I mean, Einstein, for example, was said to be using these building blocks as well. But a lot of the architecture and artists that we see, develop, who had their early childhood in that sort of later part of the 1800s, went on to really form, a lot of sort of buildings and design, which very much related to these, simple geometrics that we saw in the kindergarten. And the Bauhaus is a perfect example of this, which translates as the construction house, the school for architecture students and design in Germany. And lots of, famous artists passed through these through these courses. A couple of really famous examples. I mean, obviously there's Frank Lloyd Wright with his architecture, and clearly we can see again that the impact of these clean lines and geometries which would have been experienced in early childhood. And just a little quote here from Frank Lloyd Wright: "The structural figures to be made with peas and globes, the smooth, shapely maple blocks with which to build, the sense which never afterwards leaves the fingers, form becoming feeling." So he really sort of, pinpointed it, that it was right from those early days. And similarly, Buckmaster Fuller, who you started using the geodesic dome architecturally. Here he says, "One of my first days at kindergarten, the teacher brought in some toothpicks and semi-dried peas and told us to make structures. Pushing and then pulling, I found that the triangle held its shape while nothing else did." Obviously, we can see that direct impact. And of course, lots of artists have went through this similar time period. Kandinsky went, lots of these Mondrian and Klee all went to kindergartens, and we see this sort of minimalism appearing within their art. Also with Gego, who we can see on the front cover of Tina's wonderful new book, again we see these stick and pea-like structures. So there's lots of this that we can see, within the arts, and even Anthony Gormley in a modern sense. The pictures on the right there, again, tie into these sort of same ways of thinking. And in terms of the arts, I mean, at art school, we talk about the 7 elements of art, and these are all absolutely apparent within Froebel's, gifts and occupations. Just a quick word about my own art, and a lot of my art is very much inspired by you know, by natural forms and through the geometries. And we see, you know, you can see almost how they relate to some of the stick and pea patterns. I'm also quite interested in Islamic art, so there's sort of those influences you can see in the sculptures there as well. But yeah, you can see the basic underlying sort of geometric forms and how they can be represented in stick and pea. So it's interesting when people think of me as being sort of a metal artist. Actually, most of the time I'm playing with paper folding, cutting, you know, and you know, little bits of wood and things. So I guess in terms of one thing I would like to add in terms of thinking about this three-dimensional thinking, I think actually there's a really natural progression to woodwork, which is quite interesting to note. So initially we've got the stick and pea, which is the hollow form, and then we move on to clay, which gives the malleable form. And then we go on to woodwork, which really would be, you know, the solid form. So either, you know, and a lot of earlier sort of educationalists in the latter part of the 1800s very much, you know, advocated this as woodwork, as you know, as an occupation. And I think, you know, when we see, you know, both with carving, you know, where we're reducing form and releasing the form, and with construction, and the way it ties in so beautifully with that progression that we see as we go through the forms and returning back to the solid. So I think for me, conceptually, it makes absolute sense within that framework. So finally, just thinking, well, where do the gifts and occupations fit, you know, within today's, you know, current practice, when there's a lot more child initiated, open-ended play, perhaps, you know, advocated within the settings. You know, we think of what, you know, block play is looking like today, or, you know, work with, you know, junk modeling, or lots of work with the you know, the loose parts, both with, you know, natural materials and recycled materials. So where does slightly, you know, the more sort of, yeah, perhaps, you know, formal approach of the progression within Froebel's gifts and occupations sit today? You know, are they relevant? And I think I would really sort of like hypothesize that, you know, the gifts and occupations still could have a really important role. I mean, they really do allow a dynamic, agentic progression and understanding. You know, they're all part of a cohesive and holistic system, closely interwoven. You know, we can think of them so interlinked as provocations. You know, the materials themselves, as I say, really offer this sort of guidance. And it really allowed children to really attune to natural forms and develop this real complex sensitivity to shape, form, and pattern, and you know, really do provide the beginnings of an art and craft and design curriculum. Really, we could see, you know, it's possible to argue that some of today's more open-ended explorations could be have a bit more flexibility and perhaps offer more creative possibilities. So there's, you know, there's certainly slight differences in approaches. And I think, you know, we talk of freedom with guidance, and I think the question always comes to, well, you know, how much freedom and how much guidance? And I guess, you know, I was, you know, reflecting on these, and I felt that perhaps the gifts and occupations, when they were using, you know, in a more traditional sense, do offer slightly more guidance, whereas, you know, some of the provocations we see today offer slightly more freedom. And I don't think one's necessarily, you know, better than the other in that sense. You know, I don't see it as being an either or. But I do think, you know, and I think it'd be great to be able to combine, you know, more of Froebel's traditional sort of block play and occupations within this sort of like the progression that was originally sort of advocated. So I think there's a real value in incorporating sort of more closely with the, you know, the traditional gifts and occupations. So it would be wonderful. I mean, I certainly intend to be doing that more in terms of with my practice as well, and seeing how that happens. Anyway, thanks very much for out of time. So thanks very much for listening. I'm going to pass on now to Sally Cave and Holly Williams, who are going to be talking about growing a Froebelian leaders group.
Thank you very much, Pete. That was really, really fascinating. I loved your connections with the gifts and the occupations, stick and pea particularly, and the natural world. And Holly and I are now going to sort of follow that sort of theme, if you like, of link, always link, with a slight difference. And in very, very quick time, you'll be pleased to know as we approach 9 o'clock. So I'm Sally Cave. I'm the head teacher of Guildford Nursery School, which is a maintained nursery school, and head of the borough's family centre. Holly Williams is head of Linden Tree Nursery Schools, and that's a group of private nursery schools in South London. We both identify as Froebelian, as I'm sure everybody on this webinar tonight does, and we are both in a position of leading our schools in a Froebelian journey. And we've also both engaged with the Froebel short courses, which have really helped our schools develop along that Froebel journey. However, we're also both linked with lots of networks, some Froebelian and some more to do with our leadership role, but we both identified a bit of a gap in that there wasn't really a group or a network for leaders of Froebelian schools and settings. So we've started one. It's started very small, and it started very much in the Froebelian spirit, if you like, of we're starting where we are. We're starting where the learner is. And we have met a few times. We've also, Debbie and Mark have also also join us, as does Lucy from Ludwig Nursery School. And we are open to more people, hopefully. We're sort of, as I said, beginning from where we start, and we just want to grow organically. Currently, we have been discussing with each other our values and how they connect to the Froebelian principles and how we best share those with parents. So I'm now going to hand over to Holly.
Thanks, Sally. So yes, thank you for that lovely introduction. I just wanted to talk a little bit about those who might be interested in joining our growing group. So there's not criteria per se. However, if you are interested, you must be on your own Froebelian journey at any stage and have an interest and an affiliation to the Froebelian values and the approach itself. As Sally mentioned, we're from fairly different backgrounds. Linden Tree is the private sector, Guildford Nursery School is maintained, and we're hoping to learn and grow from those interested in Froebelian practice from all backgrounds and settings who would like to collaborate with us. All we ask is that you're in a position of leadership, by which we mean a position to affect change and impact directly on practice. This could be someone who's part of a senior management team, a childminder, owner of a setting. The possibilities are endless, really. And if you are interested or think you might know someone who might be interested, you can express this by emailing either Sally or myself. I did prematurely put our emails in the chat, so you should find them in there. So please do drop us an email. Our next meetup virtually, we have penciled in for the 12th of May at 10 a.m, where we'll be discussing how we've communicated effectively with parents and families throughout the approach during the pandemic, and hopefully meeting new people, and you'll get to learn a little bit more about us. So yeah, we don't want to take up too much more of your time. So I think that's everything. Sally, back to you.
Thank you very much. And the lovely thing, one of the positives of this year we've all lived through, is that actually wherever you are, that is not a barrier. Obviously, in a post-COVID world, we will hope to visit each other and learn from each, practically from our settings. But wherever you are in the country or the world, really, is not a barrier to joining the group. And I am now going to hand over to Stella Louis, who is going to say a few remarks to sort of enclose our gathering. Stella, it's over to you.
Hello, good evening everybody. I would just like to begin by thanking all the presenters at tonight's gathering, and all of you that have worked tirelessly behind the scenes. So Professor Tina Bruce, Oksana, Valeria, Sasha, Mark and Debbie Hunter, and Jane Winnett. But what I also want to do is just spend a few minutes on reflecting on what's been discussed this evening. And I just want to make the following comments. Mark Hunter's presentation was absolutely amazing, talking about extending the Froebelian practice into primary education. And I think one of the important things Mark did was he highlighted that Froebelian education is not just about the kindergarten, it's also about primary education. Mark also linked Froebel's first school with his current school, Annan, today, and highlighting the importance of providing children with worthwhile education, and again, highlighting the importance of teacher education. If I go to Debbie's presentation, Debbie, you said something really that kind of touched me. The Froebelian, you were trying to capture the Froebelian flavour of your EQI inspection. And you really did focus on key principles, which were about knowing each child and valuing them as individuals. Those are fundamentally key Froebelian principles that build on children's first-hand experiences. You talked about unity, engaging with nature, and everything being connected. There was freedom with guidance, self-activity, beginning where the learner is, and ultimately at every stage being that stage. And many congratulations to Mark and Debbie, not just for extending into primary education, but for an outstanding EQI inspection. And then we had Lynn McNear, who talked about creating and developing courses in Scotland and having over 500 students. Lynn, Jane, and the rest of your team, I take my hat off to you. Developing online courses is not easy, and to keep people engaged is a real challenge. And I think one of the really strong themes that came from your talk was enabling practitioners to be able to reflect on their practice. And I think it's not just about, although you talked about developing Froebelian knowledge, you also talked about one practitioner saying that it had disrupted her thoughts. I love that, because as you know, Froebel does talk about education as causing thinking, and that's one of the ways we can deepen our knowledge. If I go to Sasha and Mark and telling us how the Trust is managing in these difficult times, I think the strategy is one that's responsive to what's happening today. And I think what's more importantly, and I guess we've got the pandemic to thank, is that it has really put Froebelian education on the map. Even our term freedom with guidance is now in the birth to 5 curriculum. Jane Winnett, I loved your presentation, and I think sort of looking at Froebel's gifts and looking at his first gift and engagement with nature and the occupations, it just reminds you of how important everything is. You made a comment about mathematics being embedded in the holistic experience, and that is so very, very, very important. Pete, absolutely loved your photographs. And I love the connection that you've made with Islamic art and all different types of art. Although I'm quite keen to find out where you get the little balls from, because the cork balls, because like you, I think I'm quite uncomfortable with the idea of using food, using food in order to play with. And Pete, absolutely fantastic pictures and an inspirational talk, which I would love to hear again if we have more time. And finally, going on to Sally and Holly, I am really excited about the community of learners that the two of you have began to establish and grow. And I hope that this network is an opportunity for there to be many more of you developing your own Froebelian journey, starting with where you are at and what you can do. But lastly, I really do want to thank the Froebel Trust for, just enabling this gathering to happen giving us their Zoom account. And just to say to everybody, you know, it's been an absolutely inspiring 5th gathering. I hope that when we meet again, we can talk to each other, because I think I've missed that. As much as I've enjoyed meeting virtually, it's nice to kind of eat things and talk to people and look at various different displays. But to everybody, thank you so much for coming, and have a really lovely evening. Good night.